Welcome to Advocate with Dr. Rufus Lowe, where we aspire each and every day to eradicate the silence of good people who allow bad things to happen. And in doing so, we can together provide a new and glorious path forward for all. Our conversation will be based on the teachings of my latest book entitled Shadow Tolerance, Your Guide to Accepting Racial Difference. Shall we begin? Way back in 1954, Brown v. Board of Education became a landmark case when the United States Supreme Court unanimously ruled that racial segregation in public schools was unconstitutional. The court declared that separate but equal educational facilities were inherently unequal, striking down the precedent set by Plessy v. Ferguson in 1896. The decision was not only a legal turning point, but also a moral one. It acknowledged that state-sanctioned segregation harmed students' opportunities and also their dignity. The immediate goal of Brown was to open the doors of public education equally to all children, regardless of race, and make schools the engines of democratic equality. However, the ruling was met with fierce resistance. In many states, white families sought ways to avoid desegregation, often turning to private schools, sometimes called segregation academies. Funded directly by state tuition, grants, or vouchers. In this way, early voucher programs became tools of resisting integration rather than expanding opportunity. Now let us fast forward to today. The modern school voucher programs are framed around school choice and parental empowerment. Supporters argue that vouchers give low-income and minority families the freedom to escape failing schools, echoing the equality-based aspirations of Brown v. Board of Education. Critics, however, point out that vouchers often funnel public funds into private, sometimes even religious schools, which may lack accountability and may, in practice, reinforce racial and economic segregation. Research shows that voucher-supported private schools can be less diverse than public schools, raising the concern that vouchers reproduce the very inequalities that Brown sought to dismantle. Connections to today. Brown versus Board of Education's promise. Every child deserves equal access to public quality education. The voucher debate. Vouchers can either be seen as a continuation of that promise by giving disadvantaged families new opportunities, or as a retreat from it since they risk resegregating education and diverting resources away from public schools. In short, Brown v. Board of Education called for integrated, equitable public education. The modern voucher movement tests whether we are moving closer or drifting away from that vision. The debate over school vouchers remains one of the most polarizing issues in American education. Proponents argue that vouchers empower families by giving them choice in where their children attend school, particularly for low-income students that are trapped in failing districts. Opponents, however, counter that vouchers siphon funds from already under-resourced public schools, intensify segregation, and deepen racial inequalities. At the heart of this debate lies a critical question, and that is, do school vouchers help bridge racial divides in education, or do they exacerbate racial tension? Evidence suggests that while vouchers are promoted as a means of expanding opportunity, they reinforce systemic inequities and exacerbate racial divisions. Voucher programs and racial segregation voucher programs, in theory, promise parents the freedom to choose the best school for their children regardless of zip code. However, when implemented, they tend to magnify existing segregation. Historically, school choice emerged in the wake of Brown v. Board of Education in 1954, when some white communities used freedom of choice plans and tuition grants to avoid integration by sending white children to private schools, leaving public schools increasingly segregated. Today, voucher programs, though racially neutral on paper, often reproduce these same patterns. Families with greater social capital, financial stability, and of course access to transportation are better able to use vouchers effectively, disproportionately benefiting white and middle-class families. Meanwhile, Black and Latino families are frequently left in underfunded public schools, widening racial divides in both education quality and perception. Public versus private accountability. There's another way vouchers intensify racial tensions is through disparities in accountability. Public schools are legally obligated to serve all students regardless of race, disability, or language background. Private schools that accept vouchers, however, are not always held to the same standard. They may set admissions criteria, enforce selective discipline policies, or lack transparency about student outcomes. For families of color, this raises concerns that vouchers can function as a taxpayer subsidized tool for excluding people. The perception that public dollars are being diverted to schools that may discriminate, whether overtly or through subtle cultural biases, creates resentment and distrust, fueling racial tensions between communities. The impact of public school funding critics also highlight how vouchers exacerbate racial inequality by draining resources from public schools, which disproportionately serve students of color. Because voucher programs reallocate funding on a per pupil basis, public schools lose not only students but also crucial funding. This creates a vicious cycle. As schools with high percentages of Black and Latino students lose money, they struggle to maintain programs, hire qualified teachers, and support extracurricular activities. The perception that minority children are being left behind in crumbling schools while wealthier or white families use vouchers to access private institutions. It deepens racial resentment. Thus, vouchers do not simply expand choice, they exacerbate educational inequities rooted in racial divides. So let's talk about counterarguments and nuanced supporters of vouchers. These argue that they offer a lifeline to minority families trapped in failing schools, pointing to programs in cities like Milwaukee or Washington, D.C., where vouchers have helped some Black and Latino students access higher performing private institutions. From this perspective, though, vouchers represent empowerment, not exclusion. Yet, studies of voucher effectiveness show mixed results. Academic gains for voucher recipients are often minimal or inconsistent, while the broader negative impact on public schools persists. Moreover, the small number of minority families who benefit does not outweigh the systemic harm to the larger community of students of color left behind. So in conclusion, school vouchers are framed as a tool for equality, but their practical efforts reveal the opposite. They exacerbate racial tension by reinforcing segregation, undermining accountability, and draining resources from schools serving communities of color. While individual students may benefit, the broader social consequence is a widening racial divide in American education. If the goal is truly to promote equity, policymakers must look not to privatization, but to strengthening public schools, ensuring that all children, regardless of race or income, have access to high-quality education. Only then can education serve as an unifying rather than divisive force.